Welcome back. Now, every single thing has a background, the reason as to why conservation, or they manage, or they uphold the Constitution of Conservation. And I'm walking around with Mark, one of the friends of George and Joy. This knowledge, or the knowledge they have in store, is passed from one generation to another.
I think it's because in the early days, in the 50s and 60s, nobody really knew how unique Africa and East Africa's wildlife was in particular. And I think it was the work of George and Joy Adamson that put Kenya wildlife in particular on the map internationally. And we want to keep that legacy alive, but today we're keeping it through our educational program, because at the end of the day, if we can't persuade Kenyan children and Kenyan communities that wildlife is important, then you can see how quick development is taking place in Naivasha, and we will lose it. And the world will have lost something very special.
Okay. Given that we have the, what exactly do you have here? What?
Well, George, of course, lived in, effectively almost in a mud hut when he was working. And some of the time, Joy tended to live in a tent. But even in the tent and the hut, they had got a typewriter, she'd got a sewing machine, she'd got, and of course they'd got a lot of camera equipment, because they were recording the story of the lion and later on the story of the leopard and the cheetah. And when Joy finally was killed, and then of course George was murdered, then we gathered together as much of their goods and chattels as we could. And it's part of the way of keeping the legacy alive. So between the museum, where we have things that used to be their personal possessions, and we'll show you later the Born Free story, which is the photo exhibition on the other side, then a lot of people who've never heard of the Adamsons, especially Kenya school kids, we can explain what an important role they played 50, 60 years ago.
Conservation being part of all this, how is it important to make sure that we pass on the legacy to the next generation?
I think, for instance, we have 10 Americans here at the moment, and the Americans, many of the Americans have read the books several times. They've never had a chance to see where Joy lived, where Elsa died, and so there are whole tourist routes now that are planned around the life history of the Adamsons. And when we're talking about the history, we can also talk about the problems today. When Joy was here, I'm guessing there were hundreds of thousands of elephants, and there were probably tens of thousands of rhino. How many rhino have we got today? Very few. And the elephant numbers are down. Even lions are in trouble. There's no more than about 2,000 lions left in Kenya. And as population grows, as pressure builds, if you look at what's happening in Nairobi, where the Athi area, there's now no access. So it's vital that we keep spaces available for wildlife in the future. Otherwise, much of the tourism industry will die.
Okay. And that is one thing that Kenya does not really know, how to balance between conservation and development. Is there something we can do about that?
I think it's very, very, very difficult. It is a balancing exercise. And if you have people on the commercial side and people on the conservation side, they will never completely agree. You have to come to a sensible compromise. And I think the reason we changed the name of what used to be the Field Study Center, and we now call it the Center for Education in Sustainability, is that when we do things, we must make sure that they're not causing permanent damage. So if we destroy too many forests, yes, people need wood, people need timber, But if we cannot keep a balance and replace what we're cutting, then sooner or later we're going to get more erosion, more floods, more drought. And that's no good for anybody. It's not good for people, and it's not good for animals.
Okay.
Who did this? This is a fiberglass casting of George's face. And all I can guess is that someone originally, most people work in clay when they're doing this modeling because they can get extremely fine detail. Even if you look at George's moustache and his beard. And once they've done the model in clay, then they usually fire the clay, I think, so that they then get a casting and they can produce more copies, often the expensive ones in bronze. In Nairobi, you see many elephants and rhinos that are made by that system. But George has to stay as a fiberglass model. He hasn't got a bronze statue yet.
But he'll soon get one.
I think he will. Yeah. So one of the important things is that the Born Free film is the second Born Free film. The real Born Free film was made by George and Joy. I've got, in the archives, the photographic archives, I've got a lot of the original material. And when visitors come, they can go into the television room at the end, and they can see the original Born Free story.
Done by the Adamson.
You don't have to look at the quality of the filming and so on. We're talking about 50, 60 years ago. But the story is fascinating. And what we hope to do is to take clips. The BBC have some of the films at the moment, and they're looking at doing a repeat about the Adamson legacy.
I'm Amos Samsolo from Milimani High School, situated in Naivasha sub-county. Yeah.
So you visited here today, and I'm pretty sure it's not your first time.
Yeah, this is not my first time.
Okay. So from the consecutive times you visited here, what have you gained?
For this one, I've gained something that I've not learned from the previous one, like building charcoal from charcoal refuse, then papers, you mix together, then you come up with charcoal. That's very good. That's something that I've learned. It's something new. I can share back with my people from where I come from. Yeah.
Of course, there are benefits from coming here. You know, it's not everyone who's privileged to come.
Yeah, I agree.
And the educational programs that go on. Can you probably highlight the benefits you acquired?
The first benefit that I acquired from here is that I've at least gained something that someone who is out there haven't gained it. So once I'll share with the person out there, we'll at least gain together and know how to conserve our environment and come up with something that will make our environment friendly, and that will help us in future. That's it, yeah.
So from your gainings here and your training, can we say you're a conservationist at heart or conservationist?
I'm a conservationist at heart because at our school we have a program whereby during the short-term rains we plant trees, and during the long-term rains we plant trees. And the trees, we've conserved them a lot and we've kept them well. If you come to our school, you'll see them. They're there, they're blossoming. Yeah, that's it.
From the history of Elsamere Hotel, we can only learn one thing, and that is making a difference lies in our hands. Special thanks to the team that hosted us here at Elsamere Hotel, and also the crew behind the scenes working tirelessly to make this episode a success. My name is Anma Sharia. Stay tuned for another exciting episode. Bye-bye.